So I was watching Lifeforce for the first time in about 15 years and taking notes for an eventual review when I realised a few things about the film. It seemed too much to say for the review and just tack on randomly, so I figured I should do a separate video about them. If you've not seen Lifeforce, it's a sort of film that could only exist in the form it does. It's a big budget, mid-80s cosmic horror film about naked alien space vampires and their efforts to fuck and or eat the human race. In this one film, you got body horror, European-style erotica, cosmic horror, classically trained theatrical British actors, zombie horror, big-budget sci-fi, and the finale is essentially a Meatloaf music video. If this was made at any other time or by different people, it'd be a very different film. It'd have to be because literally no one but mid-80s canon films had the money and lack of common sense to meld so many jarringly disparate elements together. So yeah, time for some musings on Lifeforce. Firstly, and most obviously, Lifeforce, based on Colin Wilson's novel The Space Vampires, is a remix of Dracula. For example, Dracula has Dracula arriving in London on a dead ship. Lifeforce has a naked alien space vampires arriving via dead spaceship. Dracula has Mina Harker, visited nightly by Dracula and with a mental link to him, and Renfield, who's obsessed with them. Lifeforce unites him to Steve Railsback's Carlson, obsessed, mentally linked with the naked alien space vampire and visited nightly by her. In his mind, at least. Dracula is Dr. Seward and his patient Renfield. Lifeforce unites him as Patrick Stewart's Dr. Armstrong. The local authority on vampires in Dracula is Van Helsing, a doctor who randomly knows about them, and Lifeforce is Dr. Hans Fallada, who randomly knows about space vampires.
How did you kill him, Fallada? How?
A leaded metal shaft penetrating not through the heart, but through the energy center 2 inches below the heart. Not steel, but leaded iron.
Dracula has 3 brides who are subservient to him, and the naked alien space vampire has 2 husbands who are subservient to her. Even beyond all this surface level stuff, Dracula is an intensely horny book about repressed sexuality. And Lifeforce is that, but it's the 80s, so it's coked up and people suck souls of each other via making out. So yeah, it's Dracula as an alien invasion story, but with visuals in the same vein as Alien. If that sounds good, then check it out. If it doesn't sound good, then just wait and I'll start with part 2. Lifeforce features an alien menace that the human race isn't ready for, arriving to destroy us. It arrives in England and its first target is London. The first line of defense is a bunch of hapless British military types led by an unflappable officer. And also helping out is an eccentric, silver-permed science genius with an uncertain official role who knows precisely what they're dealing with. This is basically a Doctor Who film, but it's not just a Doctor Who film. This is a big-budget remake of the Jon Pertwee era. All it really changed was made the Doctor human and gave him an actual name, both which were done in the Cushing films, threw an American main character in for international appeal, and made the whole thing extremely horny for European appeal, I assume. Now, the film isn't even an unofficial remake of the Pertwee era, but you wouldn't know that based on watching it. It lines up perfectly with what you'd get if you imagine the Pertwee era remade by mid-80s filmmakers who never actually watched it.
The city is now under martial law. We've been placed under NATO command.
NATO?
Yes, sir. My unit's been mobilized across the river to a staging area at Blackheath.
And it makes it all the funnier that Elizabeth Sladen and Janet Fielding apparently both auditioned for it. Sarah Jane, I don't care if you're a naked alien space vampire. Put on clothes, you'll catch your death of cold. Anyway, if all that sounds good, then check Lifeforce out. If it doesn't, then I'll just go into part 3. This is by far the weirdest take I've come up with for the film. I've done a little looking around, and I don't think anyone else has even worked out that Lifeforce is secretly the tale of a closeted trans woman saving the world through self-acceptance and transition.
Don't look at me like that.
Like what?
Like I'm nuts!
The closeted trans woman in question is Tom Carlson, the randomly American lead played by Steve Railsback. You see, Carlson goes into space and finds the naked alien space vampire inside her penis spaceship filled with vaginas, and he's instantly obsessed with her. And it's not sex. Well, not purely sex. It's a much deeper connection than that. Or love. You see, she literally created her appearance after peering into Carlson's mind and finding his feminine ideal. Her present appearance and persona was directly lifted from the feminine in his mind.
I became the woman I found there in your deepest thoughts, your deepest needs. I am the feminine in your mind, Carlson.
Now, the intention is that she's his platonic ideal of a woman or something like that. But look at that face. That is some self-inflicted trans panic about himself right there. She's possessing Patrick Stewart at this point in the film, and shortly afterwards she and Carlson kiss. Carlson kisses a woman in a man's body. His internal woman in a man's body. She then leaves his body and recreates her feminine body out of men's blood. I trust I don't need to explain the imagery. Still later on, during a lull in some apocalyptic sex between Carlson and the naked alien space vampire in St. Paul's Cathedral, this is a very old film, we get this little exchange, which, wow.
What are these feelings? Why do I feel so close to you? Need you?
Because you're one of us. You always have been. You're like me. Be with me.
This happens shortly before Carlson kills them both by stabbing them with the same sword. The two of them joined by mutual penetration, before flying off into the penis-vagina spaceship as a single merged being. Carlson saved the day by killing the man and by becoming one with the woman in his mind. Merging with her. Becoming her. She was of him, and he became her. Kinda.
Either I did it, or she did it. I couldn't help myself.
Okay, so far this is all great. Clearly not what they intended, but it fits perfectly. But is there any more? Well, Dr. Hans Fallada spends the whole film rocking a trans pride tie, though the film predates the trans pride flag by about 15 years, so that's just funny. How about the fact that Lifeforce, like a lot of vampire fiction, deals with repressed desires, and every time Carlson talks about the naked alien space vampire, it's as though he's describing a type of euphoric completeness that he didn't know he was missing until he was separated from her again.
Part of me didn't want to leave. Leaving her was the hardest thing I ever did.
Listen to trans people's descriptions of what it's like to experience gender euphoria, to feel whole for the first time, and it is strikingly similar to Carlson's descriptions of what it's like when he's with her.
I've never experienced such. I was in love on a level you've never known, Kane.
He's just terrified and his euphoria is externalized as an evil genocidal alien. But you know, a girl can't have everything. Anyway, even though this is just my interpretation, is almost definitely not what they intended, it works perfectly. It even lines up with the vampire tropes of talking about repressed desire in subtext because they couldn't get away with doing it openly. Which goes right back to the earliest days of modern vampire fiction. What with the first example, The Vampire by John Polidori, being about what a sexy bastard Lord Byron was. So yeah, check out Lifeforce. If you still don't want to, what the hell, let's do a fourth part. Steve Railsback puts an amazing amount of work into his role as Carlson. He'd been typecast as Hicks in Serial Killers at this point in his career, so he was willing to do anything to get out of that rut. And with Lifeforce, he did it all, at once.
Where's your body? Let me go! Let me go! Let me go! Let me go! She's walking. She has a different face. This hand on her leg. It was a dream. It was a dream.
What dream, Carlson?
The girl, she visited me.
Visited you? Visited you how?
In my mind. Were you there? It's already spreading. How? You didn't stop it. It's too late. Tell her she has to talk to me. Tell her!
That is either the most acting I've ever seen a man do, or he just filmed himself having a nervous breakdown and everyone else acted around him. It worked though, he's now typecast as much older Hicks in Serial Killers and stuff. Because it's almost 40 years later. Seriously though, check out Lifeforce. It is a trip and a half and is just crying out for a long-form TV adaptation that'll let the madness really breathe and ferment.